But we do start with our continuing coverage of our breaking news out of Evansville today. One person is dead and 2 are injured after a shooting from early this morning. Evansville police say that officers were called to the 1700 block of Marshall Avenue shortly after 5:30 this morning. Some callers reported hearing dozens of gunshots, and there were also reports of people that were fleeing the area. EPD Sergeant Anthony Ossaker confirms that a 17-year-old died in this shooting and 2 other victims were taken to the hospital for non-life-threatening injuries. Officials tell us one of the victims was 15 years old. Our Mitchell Carter was live on scene for us this morning and has the latest details.
In the early morning hours of the eve of Thanksgiving, shots rang out on Marshall Avenue on the south side of Evansville, as many as 10 to 12 according to 911 callers, leaving 1 person dead and 2 others in the hospital.
Total of 3 victims were located. 1 has since been declared deceased. The 2 others were taken to the hospital for treatment. It is reported they're non-life-threatening injuries.
EPD Sergeant Anthony Oscar confirms now, after being mistaken on scene, that 2 of the victims were 15 and 17 years old, while the 3rd was an adult. We now know the 17-year-old died from their gunshot wounds. The 3rd victim's age is still unconfirmed. After the shooting, EPD formed a large several-block perimeter around Marshall Avenue, and as Oscar explains, they were looking for people who reportedly fled the scene.
When this happened, people reported they saw people running in different directions. So right now they're trying to figure out if those people were involved or if maybe they heard it and fled out of fear. The purpose of the large perimeter is to be able to utilize those resources that we have to search as best as we can.
The scene remained active for several hours, with law enforcement trying to piece together what exactly took place.
We've got crime scene out here collecting evidence, searching for anything that may lead to keys to what actually happened today.
Parked at the scene was a black Honda CR-V with the window shattered on one side. Now towed away from that scene for an examination by detectives, Oscar says they believe that's where that shooting took place. Detectives will now continue canvassing that neighborhood, conducting interviews with both the 2 victims at the hospital as well as any other witnesses who might have seen the shooting. As the crime scene remains active, Oscar notes the tragedy of the timing. 3 people shot and a 17-year-old now dead just a day before Thanksgiving.